Okay, everybody. I thought we'd take a break from sculpting the figure and go over a book that I really recommend to all my students. And I will go out on a limb and say this is probably the best how to sculpt book on the market. It's been reprinted by Dover, and it was originally written, let's see, 1902. Okay, so turn of the last century. And it's Édouard Lantéri, Modeling and Sculpting the Human Figure. It was originally a 3-part volume. They've condensed it to 2 books. The other one is on sculpting animals and mold making, casting. So this was my first copy that I purchased when I was about 17 years old. I remember being a freshman in college picking this up. And as you can see, it's been used a lot. So a couple weeks ago, I picked up a secondhand version on eBay, a slightly older reprint. As you can see, it's just in better shape. And this one, they put Rodin's hands on the front. I never really understood that. So I'm happy to have a Lantéri diagram on the front of this one. I don't know how Lantéri would have felt about that, having Rodin on the front of his book. But anyway, that's just a minor point. So I thought I'd just go through these books and explain why I think they're so good. So let me put this beat up version to the side. I'll use it for something. And let's go through this newer version, or better shaped version. So he really goes through all the vital topics that a sculptor needs, starting with a philosophical introduction. He talks about tools, sculpture stand. He goes through all the features of the face, mouth, nose, ear, eye. He talks about the anatomy of the head and skull. Then he goes into the portrait bust. He talks about hair. He talks about beards. He talks about the landscape of the face. Then he goes into the figure, and he does a standing contrapposto. And then he goes into relief sculpture and drapery. Okay, so that's just the first, the first 2 volumes of this, I believe, are condensed into this. So, tools. He gives an explanation of the tools he likes, calipers, stand, and he starts with the skull, and I think that's admirable to start with the skull. It sort of is the core of who we are. And then you have these beautiful step-by-step planes of the mouth, nose, eye, and ear. And I can tell you that my videos where I teach this, a lot of it comes directly from this book. So these pictures are great because at home you can set this book up and literally go step by step through the parts. The eye. He's copying the David eye here from Michelangelo's David. And then he goes into armatures for a portrait bust. And I think his setup for the portrait bust is very good because he makes it a geometric statement, much like a mannequin. But let's say it's an advanced mannequin. Okay, and I will say the text here is pretty legible. Sometimes you get these 19th century books, and they're very flowery and hard to understand, but Lantéri is pretty clear. So he takes you through a man's portrait bust. I think he displays 2 male portrait busts. And along the way, he's giving you explanations for the landscape of the face and the features. He does a lot of diagrams where he tells you what to do and what not to do. Here he's talking about measuring from the ear hole, from that intertragal notch. Here he's saying that you make the ear too far forward, the face looks too wide. You make it too far back, the face looks too narrow. So stuff like that, which is really helpful. These are mistakes we all make. Beard. Now here's a very thorough explanation on how to build a figure armature. Note that he's adding wires for each finger. So you can definitely take that and use it to build armatures. He does talk about action. Here he's talking about a central line of action flowing through the body. And he does discuss the anatomy and also rhythms, how the figure's balanced and how it's coordinated. So not many books talk about rhythm. And I'll show you the diagram on rhythms. Here you go. So here are some linear rhythms flowing through the body. And, I've had that book, let's see, I got it when I was 17, now I'm 36, so almost 20 years. And every time I open this book, I learn something. So you can see why I bought it again. Okay, now he takes you through sculpting a standing contrapposto male figure step by step. And he does it in a very flowing, natural way. So I can remember when I first got this book, I was, it must have been before I went away to college, because I remember sculpting, trying to copy this in my mom's basement. I remember that vividly. I tried to just copy this figure, and probably didn't come out that great, but I think I probably learned some things when I did it. I no longer have that figure. So here's the naturalistic finished figure, and he also does an écorché version of this pose, which you can purchase. Okay, so very thorough on the gross anatomy, beautiful pen and ink drawings of the muscles, skeletal system. And then he gets into relief sculpture. And admittedly, I'm not really a relief sculptor. I've done a little bit when I was in college, but I think his explanations are very good and again, step by step. And he definitely comes at it from a sculptor's perspective on the way he conceives of line and shape and planes. And the thing that I find really helpful about this book is he also covers drapery, and he calls it the anatomy of the fold. So just like learning the anatomy of the body, he's teaching the principles of drapery. And that's the great thing about a principle, is if you understand the principles, then you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. So if you can sculpt a simple fold convincingly, then you can go on to do more complex folds. And here he's showing how the planes of the fold radiate from what's called the eye of the fold, which is the bend. And you can practice this with drapery. You can just bend a piece of paper and see the principles work. He goes into even different fabrics, different materials, and talks about how they're different, how some are real sharp, how some are soft. He starts criticizing his contemporaries. He talks about how his Italian contemporaries, colleagues, use this like satin drapery that he doesn't like. He says it's too sharp. So he recommends muslin, which I guess is softer. So he's very particular about what he likes. And that's how those artists were back then. Oh, maybe like an artist today would be very particular and have a pet peeve. Here he's arranging drapery on a plaster cast, a nude sculpture. And then he arranges the drapery on the live model. These are old photographs of a model. And he breaks it down into three basic three basic vocabulary concepts here. So he can define the drapery into three things. Letter A is the point of radiation, which is where the folds come from. So, you'll see that folds will start at one point and radiate outwards. And as they do so, they create letter B, which he calls the mass of the folds. So these large clumps of drapery are the masses. And then in between the masses, you have letter C, which is a space of rest. So you can't have folds everywhere. You have to have these spaces of rest in between the masses. So very simple, just three concepts to learn. And he's got many examples there. Again, he's telling you what to do and what not to do. I like those types of lessons. So pretty extensive on the drapery. Here he applies it to a relief sculpture for you. And a little bit of medallion portrait relief work. And then he must go into some art history here with design. Okay, so you can see that's pretty thorough on that one book. So this is the one on the figure. And then he also has this, the second volume, which is on animal sculpture. I think he might even be a better animal sculptor than a human sculptor. Maybe because I don't do animals. I'm just impressed with this, but I think his horses and bulls and lions are just very powerful. So he does the gross anatomy on the animals, and then if you go in the back of this book, he has the steps of making a waist mold on a portrait bust, as well as a figure. So in the old method of throwing the plaster directly on the clay, and he even does it here with this standing contrapposto. So that will give you the principles of making molds, whether you make it with rubber or plaster. And he even does a mold of a relief sculpture. So this volume's a little smaller. I'd say this one's probably more valuable with regard to the figure, and this one's obviously more valuable if you're into animals. And you get that bonus of the how to make waist molds in the back. Okay, so Édouard Lantéri. Sometimes people get confused. This is by Albert Toft, and Toft was a student of Lantéri. And I think this book has some good things, but as it happens in history, it's a little bit of a watered down version of this. But you can see Toft was a great sculptor, so I don't want to discredit him in any way. Just know that he was the student of Lantéri, and this is perhaps closer to the source. But I've learned a lot from the Toft book as well. So I would also recommend Toft. But if people were to ask me what's the best sculpture book, it's not these new shiny computerized books. It's this 19 what is it, 1907? I forget already. It's this old book, 1902. And it's neat because in the introduction, which is written by Nathan Hale, you know, they're kind of in the midst of modern art, postmodern art rising. And, you know, it even makes them hang more towards the tradition, stronger. So these guys really believed strongly in what they were doing. And I think they understood that if they didn't teach it, the knowledge would die with them. So, you know, I kind of feel that sense of duty myself. All right, so Édouard Lantéri, I think I paid $10 for this. So there's really no excuse not to get this book. It's in a paperback, and you can find some of the original hardcovers, which are kind of nice to have too. But these are good to have in your studio, because remember what happens with a well-used studio book. Eventually it starts to fall apart. And when a book falls apart, maybe take advantage of that and just pin up certain pages that help you. You can just put them on your bulletin board, and that way you really see them. Because if your books are just on your shelf, you're not going to look at them as much.